Hi English teachers, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about one approach you could use to plan your next English class. Let's begin. So first of all, what is TBLT? Well, some people don't like reading, so don't worry, I've done the reading for you. The ideas for this TBLT lesson have come from Willis 1996 and Willis and Willis 2007. Well, TBLT, as it has in the name, it has teachers and students focus on tasks. Meaningful, hopefully real-world tasks. There is also a mix of tasks which focus on form, as well as tasks which focus on meaning. So focus on form would be, for example, introducing the present perfect versus the present progressive tenses and how they are used differently. It could be an activity which focuses on spelling irregular plurals. Focus on meaning, on the other hand, would allow your students to just go and use the language, whether they are using it accurately or not, and to really focus on successful communication along the way. This could include debates, discussions, categorizing, problem solving. Some teachers, depending on their own learning background, may feel uncomfortable with starting a class which allows students for a long time to basically just use the language without a lot of corrective feedback or focus on form. Other teachers, such as myself, who prefer to give feedback after and to allow students to at least have a shot at using the language before explicitly explaining how to use it, may be excited by TBLT because you get to start the class just using the language, and then after that you get to kind of iron out all the nooks and crannies. Okay, so this has been adapted from Willis 1996. Okay, so this is basically what the template for your lesson would look like. You would start off with the pre-task, and the pre-task would be an introduction to the topic and task. It would also usually be meaning focused or focused on language. So we're going to talk more about that in a moment. After that, you would have your main task. So this is your task cycle, which includes the students doing a task, then the students somehow planning, and then reporting. And finally, you would have the language focus at the end, which is when students would begin to focus on form. Now, let's plan our lesson. Let's say that your topic for the lesson is the environment and nature. Well, you could start the class by having your students watch a video about the top 10 most common animals in the country where you're teaching. You could then have them categorize the animals from the animal that they like the most to the animal that they like the least and explain why. And see, while your students are explaining why they like certain animals more than others, even though they may be focusing on the form of their own language, you are not focusing on form as the teacher. You're just letting them freely talk, freely express themselves. Now, if you want to give them some feedback, you could, but by TBLT's methodology, you would probably wait till later in the class. So for now, just take note. Okay, stage 2, we have the task itself, the main task. Maybe you could put your students into groups. Have each group research a different national park or provincial park. From there, they could create a brochure based on that park. This could also give them an opportunity to collaboratively try to use the vocabulary they used in the first activity, the pre-task activity. And perhaps when they're using it with the teamwork, they may use it correctly. Again, throughout this process, you are just kicking back and relaxing as the teacher. You are monitoring. You might give a little bit of feedback, a little bit of assistance or support to your students. But don't worry, the real feedback will come later on. So that's the first part of the task right there. Each group has created a brochure. Now, what they're going to do is use this material and recycle it to create something slightly different. For example, maybe you could have a national park guest panel discussion where each group takes turns being the kind of presenters. They present their brochure to the class, and other members of the class get to ask them questions about their provincial or national park, and they get to answer them. This gives them an opportunity not only to kind of claim their comprehension of the information, but also to prove the comprehension of the information. Next, the final part of the task cycle, you could get the students to go back into their groups and to slightly alter their brochures. This would be great if they were virtual brochures made on Canva. They could slightly alter them to include some additional information which came up in the panel discussion. Okay, great. Now, the final part of your lesson, this is the post-task activity, you could give some feedback to your students. That could be feedback on general errors that they made and general positive aspects of their language use, or it could be feedback on specific things. Since previously the students had to ask questions, why not make the focus on form, the post-task activity, be something which is related to framing questions? That could be asking yes/no questions. That could be asking questions with one of the WH words like what, where, who, why. Give them perhaps a worksheet to use to solidify their knowledge on question framing, and voila, your students have learned a lot about the nature in the country that they live, and they've also learned about framing questions. So they've learned a focus on meaning and focus on form. Just like any language teaching methodology, there are pros and cons to using TBLT. At the end of the day, TBLT, just like any language teaching methodology, is just a tool that you could use. Your materials, your relationship with your students, your teaching style, all of those things will play a part in how successful you are in teaching that lesson and how productive the learning experience will be. If you'd like more tips and tricks on how to improve your pedagogy, please come on over to Sala de Profesores. I use Willis & Willis 2006 task-based language teaching as a guide for my TBLT lessons, so I'll put a link to that book below. I'm also going to put a link to Google Docs file for this lesson that I presented today, and you could try this out with your students. Informed planning leads to informed teaching, and that leads to productive learning. And here at Sala de Profesores, we are trying to make sure that you could teach and plan to teach in the most efficient way possible. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and check out our other videos where we talk about other methodologies and approaches for language teachers. Thank you very much and happy teaching.